Right, we've got another essay about the Holy Land in our book of American Miscellany. And delightfully, this essay has a few accompanying pictures. So we have this beautiful engraving to start with. It's entitled Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives. Beautiful view of the city of Jerusalem. Kind of beautiful how much empty land there is. But we do have several more pictures. Let's go ahead and take a look at the next one here. This is part of the Valley of Jehoshaphat, an entrance to Jerusalem. Here we go. Entrance to Jerusalem. Okay, and then lastly, we have another beautiful image here, an illustration of the pool of Siloam. How well you can see that. Here we are. All right, now the thing I love about these essays is that they are in different voices, and I love the author of these essays. This is her third essay, and so far I've really enjoyed her voice. This essay is by Harriet Martineau. So yes, we're reading American Miscellany. We are on page 98, just having finished essay number 39, How to Make Steel. We move on to our next subject, Travels in the Holy Land. So here we are, Essay 40, Travels in the Holy Land, number 3, by Harriet Martineau. There is little pleasure in visiting the places within the walls of Jerusalem which are reported by the monks to be the scenes of the acts and sufferings of Christ. There is no certainty about these, and the spots regarding which there can be no mistake are so interesting that the mind and the heart of the traveler turn away from such as may be fabulous. About the site of the temple there is no doubt, and beyond the walls one meets at every turn assurance of being where Christ walked and talked, and where great events of Jewish history took place. Let us go over what I found in one ramble, and then my readers will see what it must be to take walks in the neighborhood of Jerusalem. Leaving the city by the Bethlehem gate, we descended into the valley of Hinnom or Gehenna. Hinnom or Gehenna. Here are many tombs cut in the rock, with entrances like doorways. When I speak of Bethany, I shall have occasion to describe the temple of the Jews. It was in this valley and close by the fountain of Siloam that in the days of Jewish idolatry children passed through the fire in honor of Moloch. This is the place called Tophet in Scripture, fit to be spoken of as it was, as an image of hell. Here in this place of corruption and cruelty, where fires hovered about living bodies, and worms preyed on the dead, here was the imagery of terror, the worm that dieth not, and the fire that is not quenched. The scene is very different now. The slopes are terraced, that the winter rains may not wash away the soil, and these terraces were today green with springing wheat. And the spreading olives and fig trees cast their shadows on the rich though stony soil. Streams were led from the pools of Siloam among the fields and gardens, and all looked cool and fresh in the once hellish spot. On the top of the opposite hill was the field of blood, the field bought as a burial place for strangers by the priests to whom Judas returned his bribe. For the burial of strangers it was used in subsequent ages, for pilgrims who died at the holy city were laid there. It is now no longer enclosed, but a charnel house marks the spot. The pools all round Jerusalem are beautiful. The cool arching rock roof of some, the weed-tufted sides and clear waters of all, are delicious. The pool of Siloam is still pretty, though less so, no doubt, than when the blind man sent to wash there opened his eyes on its sacred stream. The fountain of Siloam is more beautiful than the pool. It lies deep in a cave and must be reached by broad steps which wind down in the shadow. A woman set today in the dim light of the reflected sunshine washes linen in the pool. Here it was that in the days of old the priest came down with his golden pitcher to draw water for the temple service, and hither it was that the thought of Milton came when he sang of Siloam's brook that flowed fast by the oracle of God. We were now in the valley of Jehoshaphat, and we crossed the bottom of it where the brook Kedron must run where it runs at all, but it seems to be now merely a winter torrent, and never to have been a constant stream. When we had ascended the opposite side of the valley, we were on the Mount of Olives. The ascent was steep, now among tombs, and now past fields of waving barley, flocked with the shade of olive trees. As we ascended, the opposite hill seemed to rise, and the city to spread. 2 horsemen in the valley below, and a woman with a burden on her head, mounting to the city by a path up Moriah, looked so surprisingly small as to prove the grandeur of the scenery. Hereabouts it was, as it was said, it may reasonably be believed that Jesus mourned over Jerusalem, and told his followers what would become of the noble city which here rose upon their view, crowning the sacred mount and shining clear against the cloudless sky. Dwellers in our climate cannot conceive of such a sight as Jerusalem seen from the summit of the Mount of Olives. The Moab mountains, over towards the Dead Sea, are dressed in the softest hues of purple, lilac, and gray. The hill country to the north is almost gaudy with its contrasts of color, its white or gray stones, red soil, and crops of vivid green. But the city is the glory, aloft on the steep, its long lines of wall clearly defining it to the sight, and every minaret and cupola, and almost every stone marked out by the brilliant sunshine against the deep blue sky. In the spaces unbuilt on within the walls are tufts of verdure, and cypresses spring here and there from some convent garden. The green lawns of the Mosque of Omar are spread out small before the eye, with their groups of tiny, gay, moving people. It is now so glorious a place to the eye. What must it have been in the days of its pride? Yet in that day when every one looked for the exulting blessing, peace be within thy walls and prosperity within thy palaces, there came instead the lamentation over the Jerusalem that killed the prophets and stoned the messengers of Jehovah, and whose house must therefore be left desolate. The disciples looked hence upon the strength of the walls and the massiveness of the temple buildings, then springing 480 feet from the bed of the brook below, and the depth and raggedness of the ravines surrounding the city on 3 sides, might well ask when those things should be, and how they should be accomplished. On the 4th side, the north, where there is no ravine, the Roman army was encamped. We could now see that the rising ground, once covered with the Roman tents, but today with cornfields and olive grounds. The Romans encamped 1 legion on the Mount of Olives, but it could not do any harm to the city, and the only available point of attack, the north side, was guarded by a moat and 3 walls. The siege was long, so long that men's hearts failed them for fear, and at last one famished woman ate her own child. And at last the city was taken and nearly destroyed, and of the temple not 1 stone was left upon the other. How we were in the midst of these scenes today. We stood where the doom was pronounced, Below us was the camp of the single legion I have mentioned. Opposite was the humbled city, with the site of the temple courts, and over to the north was the camp of the enemy. Here was the whole scene of that great tribulation, such as was not known from the beginning of the world. From the summit of Olivet, we went down to the scene of that other tribulation, that anguish of mind which had perhaps never been surpassed from the beginning of the world. When Jesus had spoken these words, his words of cheer after the Last Supper, he went forth, we are told, with his disciples over the brook Kedron, where was a garden. This garden we entered today, from the other direction, and left it by crossing the bed of the brook. It is a dreary place now, very unlike what it must have been when Jesus oftentimes resorted thither with his disciples. It is a plot of ground on a slope above the brook, enclosed with fences of loose stones, and occupied by 8 extremely old olive trees, the oldest, I should think, that we saw in all our travels. I do not mean that they could have been growing in the days of Christ. That is supposed to be impossible, though I never could learn what the greatest age known to be attained by the olive tree. The roots of these were supported by a little terrace of stones, that neither trees nor soil might be washed down the slope by these winter torrents. But little remains of the once fine trees, but hollow trunks, and a few straggling branches. It is with the mind's eye that we must see the filling up of this garden enclosure, where Jesus oftentimes resorted thither, its orchard of fig, pomegranate, and olive trees, and the grass or young springing corn underfoot. From every part of it, the approach of Judas and his party must have been visible. By their lanterns and torches and weapons gleaming in the night, they must have been seen descending the hill from the city gate. The sleeping disciples may not have heeded the lights and footsteps of the multitude, but step by step as it wound down the steep, then crossed the brook and turned up to the garden, the victim knew that the hour of his fate drew on. By the way the crowd came down, we now ascended toward the city, turning aside, however, to skirt the north wall instead of returning home through the streets. Not to mention now other things that we saw, we noted much connected with the siege, the nature of the ground, favorable for the encampment of an army, and the shallow moat under the walls, where the Romans brought 2 great wooden towers on wheels, that the men in the towers might fight on a level with those on the walls, and throw missiles into the town. This scene of conflict is very quiet now. A crop of barley was ripening under the very walls, and an Arab with a soft, mild countenance was filling his water-skins at the pool, called the Sheep Pool, near the Damascus gate. The proud Roman and despairing Jew were not more unlike each other than this Arab, with his pathetic face was unlike them both. As he stooped under the dim arches of the rock, and his red cap came into contrast with the dark gray of the still water below, and the green of the dangling weeds over his head, our thoughts were recalled to our own day, and to a sense of the beauty we meet in every nook and corner of the Holy Land. From this ramble, my readers may see something of what it is to take walks in the neighborhood of Jerusalem. We have one more engraving of the Garden of Gethsemane. So let's see if we can get a nice view of that. There we are. Garden of Gethsemane.